You've been lied to about ancient superfoods. Everything you think you know about quinoa, chia seeds, and acai berries being the secret diet of ancient warriors. Yeah, most of that is complete nonsense, and I'm about to prove it to you. So here's the thing. Walk into any health food store today and you'll see labels screaming about ancient grains and superfoods of the Aztecs. Companies are making billions selling you the idea that people thousands of years ago had access to some magical foods that made them stronger, healthier, and basically immortal. But here's what they're not telling you. Most of these foods were either dirt-cheap staples that nobody thought twice about, or they weren't even eaten the way we eat them today. Some weren't considered special at all until marketing teams got their hands on them. I've spent weeks digging through actual historical records, archaeological evidence, and talking to experts who study ancient diets. And what I found is going to change how you look at that expensive bag of quinoa sitting in your pantry. Because the truth is way more interesting than the marketing hype. And honestly, it's kind of hilarious how we've twisted history to sell overpriced groceries. Let's start with the biggest problem here. We've created this fantasy version of ancient civilizations where everyone was eating these pristine, nutrient-dense superfoods and living these perfectly healthy lives. But that's not reality. That's a story someone made up to sell you stuff. And the real history? It's been buried under decades of marketing campaigns and half-truths. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a product labeled peasant food or something poor people ate because they had no other choice? Never, right? Because that doesn't sell. But that's actually what most of these so-called superfoods were. They were survival foods. They were what people ate when they couldn't afford anything better. And somehow, we've turned that into a premium health trend. Let me give you the first example that's going to blow your mind. Quinoa. You know quinoa, right? That grain that costs like 3 times more than rice and every health influencer swears by? Here's what actually happened with quinoa. The Incas did grow it, that part's true, but they called it the mother of all grains, not because it was some elite superfood. They called it that because it grew in terrible conditions where nothing else would survive. It was a backup crop, a safety net. The Incas grew quinoa at high altitudes where the soil was poor and the weather was harsh. It was reliable, sure, but it wasn't their first choice. When they had better options, they ate those. Potatoes, corn, other grains. Quinoa was what you ate when times were tough. It was peasant food. And here's the kicker. For decades in the 20th century, quinoa was so looked down upon in South America that people were embarrassed to eat it. It was associated with poverty and indigenous communities that were being discriminated against. Then suddenly in the 2000s, Western health markets discovered it. And boom. Overnight, this cheap survival grain became a luxury health food. Prices skyrocketed. And you know what happened? The people in Peru and Bolivia, who had been growing and eating quinoa for generations, suddenly couldn't afford it anymore. Because we turned their basic staple into an expensive export. That's not ancient wisdom. That's modern capitalism rewriting history. Now let's talk about chia seeds. You've definitely seen these everywhere. Chia pudding, chia smoothies, chia everything. And the story always goes like this. Aztec warriors would eat chia seeds before battle, and it would give them superhuman energy and endurance. They'd run for days on just a handful of these magical seeds. Sounds amazing, right? Except there's basically no evidence this ever happened. Yes, the Aztecs grew chia. Yes, they ate it. But so what? They grew and ate dozens of different crops. Chia wasn't special. It was just one plant among many. There's no historical record of warriors specifically eating chia before battle. There's no ancient text that says chia gave anyone special powers. That whole story, it comes from a book written in the 1960s that made a bunch of claims without solid sources. And then modern marketing ran with it because it sounded cool. Here's what we actually know about chia from historical records. The Aztecs used it mainly for 2 things, making a drink and paying taxes. That's right. Chia seeds were so common and cheap that they were literally used as tax payments. Imagine paying your taxes with something that's now being sold as a premium superfood. The Aztec nobility weren't out there eating chia pudding for breakfast. They were eating cocoa, vanilla, exotic meats, the good stuff. Chia was boring. It was what regular people ate because it was easy to grow and store. And get this, After the Spanish conquered the Aztec Empire, chia pretty much disappeared from cultivation for centuries. Nobody cared about it. It wasn't until the 1990s that someone decided to try commercializing it again. And they needed a story. So they dug up that old claim about warriors and ran with it. Now you're paying $10 for a tiny bag of seeds that used to be peasant food and tax currency. Let's move on to acai berries. This one's my favorite because the disconnect between marketing and reality is just absurd. You've seen acai bowls everywhere, right? They're supposed to be this Amazonian superfruit that indigenous tribes have been eating for thousands of years, and that gives them incredible health and vitality. The antioxidants, the nutrients, the ancient wisdom. Here's the truth. Yes, people in the Amazon have been eating acai berries for a very long time, but not in bowls with granola and honey and sliced bananas. They ate it as a basic staple food. They'd make it into a thick paste and eat it with fish or cassava. It was filling, it was available, that's about it. Nobody thought it was magic, it was just food. The acai berry boom happened in the early 2000s, when American companies discovered they could market it as an exotic Amazonian superfruit. They started making wild claims about weight loss and anti-aging, and all this other stuff that had zero scientific backing. The Federal Trade Commission actually had to step in and fine companies for false advertising about acai. But by then, the hype was already out of control. And just like with quinoa, the sudden Western demand for acai created huge problems in Brazil. Prices went up. Local people who depended on acai as an affordable food source started getting priced out. Meanwhile, we're over here making Instagram-worthy acai bowls and pretending we're tapping into ancient tribal wisdom. We're not. We're just eating expensive berry paste with toppings. Now I want to talk about something that's going to sound obvious once I say it, but somehow nobody thinks about. The whole concept of superfoods is modern. It's a marketing term. It has no official scientific or historical definition. Ancient civilizations didn't have superfoods, they had food. Some of it was nutritious, some of it wasn't. Some of it was expensive and rare, some of it was cheap and common. But nobody was walking around ancient Rome or ancient China talking about superfoods. The term superfood really took off in the early 2000s as a way to market exotic or unusual foods at premium prices. And here's how it works. You take a food that's common somewhere else in the world, somewhere most Western consumers have never been. Then you dig up some historical or cultural fact about it. Doesn't matter if the fact is accurate or relevant, just needs to sound good. Then you slap on some health claims. Maybe cite 1 or 2 studies that show it has antioxidants or omega-3s or whatever, and boom, you've got yourself a superfood. Mark up the price by 500% and watch the money roll in. But here's what they're not telling you. Almost all foods have some nutritional value. Blueberries have antioxidants, so do regular old apples. Chia seeds have omega-3s, so does fish, and flaxseed, and walnuts. Quinoa has protein, so does chicken, and beans and eggs. There's nothing magical about these so-called ancient superfoods, they're just food, with good marketing. Let me give you another example. Goji berries. These are supposed to be this ancient Chinese superfood that's been used in traditional medicine for thousands of years. And sure, goji berries have been eaten in China for a long time. But you know what else has been eaten in China for a long time? Everything. China has thousands of years of agricultural history. Goji berries were just one plant among thousands. And here's the thing about traditional Chinese medicine. It's not the same as modern nutrition science. Traditional medicine systems were based on concepts like balancing energy and hot versus cold foods. They weren't analyzing nutrient content in labs. When ancient Chinese texts say a food is good for you, they're usually talking about it in terms of these traditional concepts, not because they measured its antioxidant levels. But Western companies took goji berries, stripped away all that cultural context, and repackaged them as a scientifically proven superfood. And now you can buy dried goji berries for $20 a pound. Even though fresh goji berries in China are cheap and unremarkable, it's the same pattern over and over again. Here's something else that's going to change how you think about this. A lot of these ancient superfoods weren't even eaten in their current form. Take cacao, chocolate. We're told the Mayans and Aztecs considered cacao sacred and drank it in ceremonies. And that's true. But they weren't drinking hot chocolate with milk and sugar. They were drinking bitter, spicy, sometimes fermented cacao mixed with chili peppers and other ingredients. It was nothing like what we eat today. The same goes for most grains and seeds. Ancient people didn't have the same processing methods we have now. They couldn't make quinoa flour or chia pudding. They didn't have blenders for acai bowls. They ate these foods in much simpler, often less appealing ways. Boiled, ground into paste, fermented. The Instagram-ready versions of these foods are completely modern inventions. And let's talk about variety for a second. We act like ancient people had these incredibly diverse, nutrient-rich diets because they ate all these different superfoods. But that's backwards. Most ancient people had way less dietary variety than we do today. They ate what grew locally, what was in season, what they could afford. If you were a farmer in ancient Peru, you probably ate potatoes and corn and quinoa and not much else. Day after day, year after year. That's not a superfood diet. That's a survival diet. The wealthy people in ancient civilizations had access to variety. They could afford imports and exotic foods and meats, but even they weren't thinking about nutrition the way we do now. They weren't eating for antioxidants or omega-3s. They were eating for taste, status, and satisfaction. The whole idea of eating specific foods for specific health benefits is surprisingly modern. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Some of these superfood claims are based on actual nutrition science. Quinoa does have complete protein. Chia seeds do have omega-3s. Acai does have antioxidants. But here's the thing. Having nutrients doesn't make something magic. And it doesn't mean ancient people were eating these foods because they knew about those nutrients. They didn't. They couldn't have. They didn't have microscopes or laboratories. Ancient people figured out what worked through trial and error over generations. They knew certain foods kept them full longer. They knew some foods were easier to store. They knew what grew well in their climate. That's practical knowledge. It's valuable knowledge. But it's not the same as understanding vitamins and minerals and chemical compounds. We're projecting our modern scientific understanding backwards onto ancient cultures, and then acting like they had some secret wisdom we've lost. The reality is way more boring. Ancient people ate what was available. They developed preferences and traditions around certain foods. Sometimes those foods happened to be nutritious. Sometimes they weren't. Nobody was running around ancient Egypt eating chia seeds for the omega-3s, because they had no idea what an omega-3 was. Let me tell you about one more example that really shows how ridiculous this has gotten. Bone broth. You've probably heard bone broth being marketed as this ancient healing food that our ancestors swore by. And yes, people have been making broth from bones for thousands of years. You know why? Because it was a way to use every part of an animal. Nothing to do with collagen or gut health or any of the modern claims. When you slaughtered an animal, you used everything. The meat, the organs, the bones, the skin, everything. Because food was valuable and nothing could go to waste. So you'd boil the bones to extract any remaining nutrition. That's it. That's the ancient wisdom. Don't waste food. Somehow we've turned that into a $15 cup of broth at trendy cafes. And the health claims around bone broth. Most of them are overblown or unproven. Yes, broth has some nutrients, so does eating meat, or vegetables, or literally any other food. There's nothing magical about it. But by calling it an ancient healing food, companies can charge premium prices for something that used to be made from scraps. So here's what I want you to understand. The ancient superfood trend isn't about history. It's not about honoring traditional knowledge or learning from ancient cultures. It's about marketing. It's about taking foods from other cultures, stripping away the context, making up or exaggerating historical claims, and selling them at massive markups to people who want to believe they're accessing some kind of ancient wisdom. And the damage this does goes beyond just wasting your money. When Western demand drives up prices for traditional staple foods, it hurts the communities that depend on those foods. When we reduce entire cultures to a few trendy foods, we're erasing the complexity and richness of those cultures. And when we make up fake history to sell products, we're disrespecting both the past and the present. The truth is, ancient people didn't have superfoods, they had food. Some of it was good. Some of it was just okay. Some of it was survival food they ate because they had no choice. They weren't healthier than us because of special foods. They were often less healthy. Life expectancy was lower. Disease was more common. Malnutrition was widespread. Yes, there are things we can learn from traditional diets and agricultural practices, but romanticizing the past doesn't help anyone. If you want to eat quinoa or chia seeds or acai berries, go ahead. They're fine foods, they have nutritional value. But don't buy into the mythology. Don't pay premium prices because you think you're tapping into ancient wisdom. And definitely don't believe marketing claims about warriors and tribes and secret knowledge. Most of it is made up. The real lesson we should learn from ancient diets isn't about specific superfoods. It's about eating a variety of whole foods, not relying too heavily on processed stuff, eating what's local and seasonal when possible. Those are the actual patterns that made sense historically and still make sense today. But you can't trademark those ideas. You can't sell them in fancy packaging. So instead, we get superfood marketing. And here's the final thing I want to say. The obsession with superfoods actually distracts us from bigger, more important issues with our modern diet. We're so focused on adding exotic, expensive foods that we ignore the basics. Most people would be way better off just eating more vegetables. Any vegetables. Doesn't matter if they're ancient or exotic. Just regular vegetables. But that's not exciting. That doesn't sell. So companies keep churning out new superfoods. Every few years there's a new one. A new ancient grain or berry or seed that's going to change your life. And every time, the same pattern plays out. Exaggerated claims, inflated prices, impacts on local communities. And eventually the hype dies down and we move on to the next one. Meanwhile, the actual history gets more and more buried under layers of marketing nonsense. The truth about ancient superfoods is that there's no truth to the way they're being sold to us. The stories are fake or exaggerated. The health claims are overblown. The prices are ridiculous. And the whole concept is a modern invention designed to separate you from your money. Ancient people ate food, sometimes good food, sometimes bad food, usually just okay food. They didn't have superfoods. We made that up. So next time you're at the store and you see something labeled as an ancient superfood, with some story about warriors or tribes or traditional wisdom, just remember, someone in a marketing department made that up. The real history is probably way less exciting. And you can get the same nutrients from boring, cheap, regular food that doesn't have a fancy origin story. That's the truth they don't want you to know. Because once you know it, you stop buying into the hype. And that's bad for business. But it's good for you. Because now you can make actual informed choices instead of falling for marketing mythology. And honestly, that's more empowering than any superfood could ever be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Retry.